Number 1. The Creek. I grew up in a family with 4 boys and 1 girl. My sister was the oldest, and she was always left in charge of us when our parents weren't around. She tried her best to be a good babysitter, but she had 4 boys who didn't like being told what to do. So it was hard to blame her at all if things ever got out of hand. My parents bought a house out in the country when my dad got a job in a new state. Unfortunately, it was a good 1 hour out of town. So in the summer, when my parents were off working, my sister had to deal with the 4 of us every day. As I mentioned, we didn't like being told what to do by our older sister, so we often would leave and go exploring or fishing during the day. I was the 3rd oldest boy, or the 2nd youngest. I guess it all depends on which direction you want to count from. On this one summer day, when both of our parents were at work, the boys all got together and grabbed our fishing poles and went out to have a fun day. We lived in a rural area, and there was a creek about an hour's walk from our house that we loved to fish in. We headed out early, and we were there before noon. When you fish in a creek, you rarely catch anything big. On this day, though, we really didn't catch anything. All of us had spent hours trying to fish, but absolutely nothing was biting. It didn't take long for this to get boring, and I decided I was going to wander around a little bit. It was only a little while later that I felt a need to go to the bathroom, so I went behind a tree and did my thing. When I was about done, I felt a hand fall on my shoulder. I jumped quick and got a little bit of pee on my shoe. I was about to turn around and swear at whichever brother it was that startled me. But when I turned around, I felt the words catch in my throat when I realized it wasn't one of my brothers. Hell, it was a big redneck-looking guy. He was huge, wore overalls, and had a really big and scraggly beard. In shock, I tried to move away, but the behemoth grabbed me by the shoulder and held me in place. I struggled, tried to find a way to get away from him. I tried to hit him in the balls, but he was too big and was able to keep me away from him. Then, the worst thing of all happened. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a jackknife. He quickly put the blade of the knife up against my neck. I froze, too scared to even think about doing anything. I just wished my brothers would come looking for me. But I was too afraid to even scream to get their attention. The guy began asking me who the hell I thought I was, and why was I peeing on his property. I wanted to tell him that I didn't know this was his property. I was just out with my brothers fishing, and there were not any anti-trespassing signs, so we didn't know we weren't supposed to be there. The man pressed the knife tightly up against my neck. I really believed that I would be dying right then and there. I even felt a trickle of blood run down my neck when the guy pushed the knife deeper into me, piercing the skin. The guy began dragging me, and right when I felt I was just out of luck, I heard some footsteps running in the leaves. My 2 older brothers, both big football jocks, yelled at the guy to get his damn hands off me. My oldest brother knocked the knife out of his hand, and I fell to the ground. Although the man was huge, he was no match at all for both of my brothers. I picked up the knife and went to stab the guy. My 2nd brother grabbed it from me. He threatened the big guy with it. The man got up and ran off. We hurried back to collect our youngest brother. After that, we ran home. The entire way, we thought the man was following us. However, we got home all right. My sister was pissed, But when we told her what happened, she called our parents. When my dad came home, we found out that the land we were on belonged to the man my dad had bought the house from. When we contacted him, he didn't know the big guy when we described him, and we never ever found out who he could have been.
Alright, this incident took place in August of 2012. It was my friend's birthday and we were taking him out deep sea fishing for a fun activity. My dad owned a yacht and that was big enough for deep sea fishing, so we went out far. After about an hour into the boat ride, we stopped in a spot that we thought was a good place to get a decent catch. We stopped and within a few minutes we were fishing. So, we fished for about 10 minutes, and we got about 3 fish that were pretty good size. We were interrupted by a noise that sounded similar to another boat. We looked to the side and saw a boat with some guy waving at us. Red flags started going off immediately. I noticed that this guy didn't look anything like a fisherman, and the way his boat looked too. It was the kind of boat you would expect to see in the dump or something. I also noticed that he didn't have any fishing gear with him, so I was confused as to what he could be doing this far out at sea. You may be thinking that maybe he could just be a normal guy on his boat enjoying a nice ride, but this guy looked like someone who would get into a lot of trouble. Anyway, not trying to be rude, we waved back at him to give him a quick hello, and hoped he would go away after that. Unfortunately, he didn't. He then stopped his crappy boat and jumped into the water, swimming towards our boat. Immediately, we drove away from him, leaving him behind. We went far enough where he could no longer catch up to us, and it would be hard for him to try and find us. That night, we all sailed back to the marina, making sure that the guy didn't follow us. Everyone went to bed at around 1 a.m. and I was the only one who stayed awake. I was still thinking about that man. Finally, I got some shut-eye for about an hour and woke up to a notification sound on my phone. I reached under the bed to try to get the phone, but I couldn't feel my phone. What I felt instead was a hand. But by then it was too late. I felt the hand grab my arm and I screamed for everyone to get up. My dad came in and pulled a man out from under the bed. However, I noticed that it was the same man we had seen earlier. The fight was over in seconds after my dad punched the guy. We called the police and they arrived within minutes, arresting the man. The police and my dad also found his boat in our marina. I don't like describing what they found on that boat. My dad didn't tell me or my friend, but a few days ago, when I was 19, he finally told me. My dad said he went into the boat with the police, and the first thing they noticed was the smell of a bad odor, and then they saw the body bags. The man was put in jail for life, and I'm grateful to this day to have my dad on that trip with us. My dad could have saved us from something horrible happening that night. But I've always wondered something. I wondered what would have happened had my phone not made a notification noise, and had I not woken up.
Number 3. On the river. I like to go fishing in the lakes and rivers in my area. It is a really huge area with tons of hills and forests. The lake is a big fishing and swimming area. But if you take your boat off of the lake and out into the river, very often you can find yourself very much alone. Every now and then, I'll keep my boat out on the river, and even spend the night out on the river. The only bad thing about sleeping in a boat is that you can get yourself a really stiff neck by the morning. A year ago, I had a pretty harrowing experience out on the river. It was the beginning of fall. The leaves had mostly turned colors, but they really hadn't been falling out of the trees much. The hills were going to be very beautiful. There weren't many people out on the lake that day. It made sense. School was back in session, and parents didn't tend to take their kids out while that was happening. It was cool to me though, because I knew that I would have some really good alone time. It didn't take long before I found my way down to the river. If the lake was mostly empty, the river was completely empty. I began fishing, and had a lot more luck than I had expected to get. I completely lost track of time as I slowly floated down the river. As the sun began to go down, I found myself beginning to feel relatively creeped out. I wasn't sure why, as I had been in this position before, but I realized it may have had to do with how empty the lake had been. Even when people like being by themselves, when they like being lonely, the loneliness can still be frightening. I wish I could truly explain what it was like. The sun was setting behind one of the hills, making the sky a bright orangish pink color. Not only that, but it was appearing to be blazing behind that different colored trees on the hill, making the scene look like a painting. It was nice to see. No words could really do it justice. The sun went down as I floated down the river. After a while, the sun went all the way down under the horizon, and I was left in the dark. Well, I had some lights on my boat, of course, but only the ones I was legally required to have on. The sun was replaced by the moon, and it was both full and bright. It looked lovely as it reflected off of the river. I don't know how long it had been that I drifted down that river before I heard the noise. It wasn't a scream. It almost seemed like an angry, frustrated yell. I perked up and immediately looked off in the direction of the sound, and I'll never ever forget what I saw, or what I think I saw. Two men were standing in the woods, not so deep that I couldn't see them. They looked like they were fighting, but it was a very one-sided fight. The bigger man knocked the smaller man hard upside the head, and his body just crumpled to the ground. And then the bigger man grabbed his arm and dragged him off into the forest. Not once did either man seem to have noticed me, as far as I knew. I wasn't really sure how to react. I was shocked. But after a moment, I quickly pulled my cell phone out of my bag, and of course, I didn't have a signal. I cursed a few times, but I took my boat to the shore and put down a marker so I would be able to find the area again. I intended to direct the police to it. I tried to be quiet because I didn't want the man to come back. I then got in my boat and tried to get back to the lake. I kept as far from that side of the shore as I could. After a few minutes, something caught my eye, and I looked back at the shore, and I saw some movement there, but I wasn't sure what it was. When I got back to the lake, I went past the parking lot area to go to the dock. My truck was one of only 2 vehicles in the parking lot. There was one other truck, and it was parked right beside mine, and I could have sworn I saw someone sitting in the front seat. I quickly checked my phone again, and I had a bar. So I quickly called the police and remained out on the lake until they arrived. They arrested the guy, who confessed to getting into a fistfight with his brother before knocking him out. He had seen me in the boat and drove to the parking lot in order to make sure I kept my mouth shut. Fortunately, his brother was only injured and not dead. But the man was arrested, and I had to go to court for several months after that. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. I'd like to thank Mr. Haunted for joining me for this narration. Please visit his channel in the links provided, and make sure to subscribe while you're there. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please hit the subscribe button below, or use the Ichigo icon that will appear at the end of this video. Feel free to leave a comment to let me know what you thought, and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you're truly bored, you can always follow Ichigo and myself on Facebook and Twitter. I'll see you all tomorrow, and until then, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.